Okay, welcome to this section 11, A-level Buddhism with Anthology analysis video on Rahula's Bodhisattva ideal in Buddhism. This is section 11. Let's read it and then we'll analyze it. Mahayana, one who takes the great vehicle, is a person who, living according to the law of the bodhisattvas, by nature having sharp faculties bent on the liberation of all beings, depending on the canon of the bodhisattvas, matures other beings, cultivates the pure bodhisattva domain, Buddha domain, receives predictions or declarations via karana. From this, we can see that anyone who aspires to become a Buddha is a bodhisattva, a Mahayanist, though he may live in a country or a community popularly, traditionally regarded as Theravada or Hinayana. Similarly, a person who aspires to attain nirvana as a disciple of a Stravaka Yankee or a Hinayanist, though he may belong to a country or community considered Mahayana. Thus, it's wrong to believe that there are no bodhisattvas in Theravada countries, or that all are bodhisattvas in Mahayana countries. It is not conceivable that Stravakas and bodhisattvas are concentrated in separate geographical areas. So, what is the great vehicle? And how much is Rahula spitting feathers, coughing, giving quotation marks, rolling his eyes as he quotes this and then reinterprets it? Here, Rahula, in admirable composure, describes, paraphrases Asanga's Abhidharma Samayukya teachings about the great vehicles. Cue teenagers rolling of eyes. Mahayana, a term found in the Lotus Sutra, which he mostly rejects as a Theravada apologist. Again, to describe for the wide audience, Theravada, Mahayana, non-Buddhists, the heresy of practice and theory, he will then go on to challenge. That's what he's doing. And he's going to use some clever redefinition of terms. What then is the law of the bodhisattvas? It's a really interesting term. This is both specific books, especially perhaps the present book that Rahula is quoting Asanga's Abhidharma Samayukya, 4th century. And perhaps it could also refer to the law of the bodhisattvas, a more general, perhaps oral tradition teaching of Mahayana that emerged earlier than this in the 2nd century, that began to crystallize even earlier than that with the Perfection of Wisdom literature. And here is being referred to in paraphrase of this 3rd, 4th century Yogacara text of Asangas. The law of the bodhisattvas that Rahula is referring to is in fact something he is subverting. He's subversively reinterpreting, redefining. And it is as such the developing and evolving vow, rather. Basham, in the previous anthology we've looked at, has tried to examine. It's the same thing, the law of the bodhisattva, the vow of the bodhisattva. How Basham says, well, this is something that's grown over time in his anthology text. Who now is the sharpest knife in the block? Haha. And what is the function of the current positive ethos, reinforcement, rhetoric? What can we say? By nature, having sharp faculties. Who's the sharpest knife in the block? Bent on the liberation of all beings. So, The Essentialism, i.e. Mahayana is sharp, Theravada is blunt, that Asanga will say, and Rahula will be in grinding his teeth as he quotes, of this Yogacara text, hugely grating on Rahula here, but admirably he doesn't show it, he just quotes it, paraphrases it. The sharp faculties claims an appeal to authority that Asanga is making, that Rahula is about to subvert, which is actually a reverse ad hominem, an attack on the credentials of Mahayana. Sanger, who's the author of the text, and perhaps the claim that mystically the great heavenly bodhisattva Avalokitesvara is the author of the text supernaturally, something, of course, Rahula at the end of this text will say, a mythical class of bodhisattvas, are being used by Rahula to strengthen an argument that the bodhisattva soteriology is the more perfected way than the Stravaka or Prakya Hinayana way, which in turn Rahula will subvert. So what is Asanga's theory of liberation? The liberation, here it is again, the liberation of all beings. Well, this word liberation can mean many things. Boswell in his dictionary describes liberation as the word deliverance in English, the state of freedom from rebirth that is achieved by different paths that we've looked at, Stravaka, Prakya Buddha, or Bodhisattva. In the Mahayana literature, this liberation is said to be of three types. There are three doors to deliverance, or vikmoks. There is the door of emptiness, sunyata, signlessness, amita, animita, and wishlessness. Another set of 8 grades of liberation then is discussed in Yogacar's thinking, associated with the attainment of meditative absorption. Now, this is probably owing more to the influence of perhaps the Stravaka on Mahayana, the dhyanas, perhaps even going back to the early Buddhist teaching. The Pali sources these 8 grades or 8 levels in the extension of consciousness. Remember, we've come across this, the 31 planes of existence, or consciousness above the 6 realms of existence. All of these esoteric, increasingly fine-grained attempts at describing the levels of development. And these levels, 8 levels, are in the extension of consciousness that you cultivate in increasingly more advanced states of dhyana. So what are the 8 states? Roughly the perception of the material form, rupam, the most basic state. I see my body. While remaining in the subtle materiality realm. Not quite sure what that is, but maybe you can look it up. The perception of external material forms while not perceiving one's own form. These are mystical states. The development of confidence through the contemplating of the beautiful. Passing beyond the material plane with the idea of limitless space. What is that? One attains the plane of limitless space, the first level of the immaterial realm. These are higher consciousness, transcendental awareness type things. Passing beyond the plane of limitless space with the idea of limitless consciousness, one attains the plane of limitless consciousness. Passing beyond the plane of limitless consciousness, the idea there is nothing, one attains the plane of nothingness. Passing beyond the plane of nothingness, one attains neither the perception nor non-perception. Passing beyond the plane of neither perception or non-perception, one attains the cessation of consciousness. You become, well, do you attain nibbana, or really is this the attaining of Buddha nature? In the Mahayana, contrasting Abhi advanced Dharma, it's said that the first 2 grades enable bodhisattvas, the material realms or reflections, enable bodhisattvas to manifest different forms for the sake of others. So in this physical world, you can appear differently to different beings as a upaya act to help them. And this perhaps explains some of the mythology around the life of the Buddha, some of the miraculous ways he appears to others. I think of the Angulimala serial killer story where the Buddha can't be caught miraculously by Angulimala, the serial killer. The third controls their attitude towards those forms, seeing beauty and ugliness as just the same sort of thing, relative to each other. And the remaining 5 enable them to live at ease in order to help others, perhaps because you are being reborn time and again as a bodhisattva, maybe perhaps because you're a transcendent heavenly bodhisattva. So why all beings? Here we have here, all beings. Well, Mahayana Buddhism, Asanga is regarded arhatship as an inferior ideal to that of Buddhahood. He portrays the arhat somewhat unfairly as selfishly concerned with the goal of private nirvana. In contrast, the emphasis is placed on the great compassion, the Mahakaruna of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, who dedicate themselves to leading all beings to salvation. The extensiveness of this soteriological vision is perhaps reflected in a number of related ideas and practices. Well, first of all, how is this developed, extended? The idea of being the vision of the range, the extent of the soteriological vision. Well, in the way the practice of the 4, number 1, that Brahma Viharas involves radiating positive qualities associated with the states of mind, first to yourself, to one's family, to local community, and eventually to all beings in the universe, as a form of compassion. Maybe second, that all beings possess Buddha nature. So this vision that enlightenment for some, a third kind of enlightenment, not nibbana, achieving nibbana, not being a bodhisattva, but discovering your Buddha nature that's within all of us. Or the idea that's subtly different, the idea of Buddha mind, Bushin, is or in original enlightenment that is in all beings. So, different ways. Why all beings, and does this really matter? So again, this phrase, all beings. Well, if all beings have Buddha nature, all beings need to know compassion, then that's why there must be this extensive soteriological vision. Okay, what canon of the and boom, what is the canon of the bodhisattvas? No, it's not a gun, not that kind. Well, Basham has given an account as he's tried to show how the bodhisattva vow developed. He meticulously attempts to go through the textual development, the bodhisattva vow from the 8,000 verses all the way through to Shantideva's 8th century account via the 25,000 lines, the Lotus Sutra, the 25,000 lines 0 AD, the Lotus Sutra 150 AD, perhaps the Buddha Nature Tathagata Garbha Sutra 200, 300 AD, the Abhidharma Samayukya of Asanga, and some other texts that actually get in there. That there are many texts actually that are in this developmental period of Mahayana that he goes through. Here are some of the more. So the perfection of wisdom literature, 25,000 lines, I've said, 100,000 lines, the Lotus Sutra, the Mahapari Nirvana Sutra is another one, the Diamond Sutra. I don't quite know when it was written, perhaps 2nd to 3rd century. Um, Now, not in view by Sangha, but Basham would be aware of some more sutras. The Suragama Samya Yutra, or the Heart Sutra. What does it mean to mature other beings? He matures other, the Bodhisattva matures other beings. The idea that Bodhisattva matures others is something that develops as the vow develops in the context of, as Basham has sought to believe, to show. In general, this would have been a Sangha's view. By the time of a Sangha, the vow had been soteriologically extended to all beings. Remember, he's 4th century. In general, this would have been a Sangha's view. What Rahula would contest would be the nature of such maturing. What does it mean to be a mature Buddhist? Is it, as a Sangha would say, a Yogacara way of discovering a luminous mind that's not quite Buddha nature? Is it to be more a compassionate being? Or is it, as Rahula will argue, the Theravada notion of the virtue of nikayama, or renunciation, of the 4 stages of the Arahat path, which of course a Sangha would reject? What is the pure Buddha domain, and what does Rahula think of Sangha's Mahayana teaching? So Sangha here, quoted by Rahula, says cultivates, bhavana, there's that key word, bhavana, meditates, the pure Buddha domain. Well, this begins to feel a bit like a caricature and not a paraphrase of the practice and theory that a Sangha would articulate. And notice the language here that switches from paraphrasing a Sangha to a slippery argument or set of arguments by Rahula. A Sangha's Yogacara had come to articulate first the Trikaya doctrine more extensively than anyone else had, because of the absence of duality. How to explain reality. And a Sangha develops that. The Dharmakaya doctrine was possibly first expounded in the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 verses, but not highly developed. Mahayana Buddhism introduced the Sambhakaya, the heavenly sort of bliss realm, which conceptually fits between the Nirmanakaya, the manifestations of enlightenment, the transformation realm, the sort of earthly realm in the physical world, and the Dharmakaya around 300 BC. The Yogacara school systematized the prevalent ideas on the nature of the Buddha in the Trikaya, or the 3-body doctrine. The Buddhist Handbook, a complete guide in the Buddhist Handbook. So in Yogacara, you have this notion of the storehouse consciousness, postulated as the reception of the imprint of thoughts and deeds, the dwelling of various karmic seeds. The seeds develop into the touch, the mental activity, the feeling, the perception, the will, the corresponding to the 5 skandhas. It's an evolution and development of that, the aggregates. In Yogacara, this is followed first by the emergence of ideation, where that is the manas, which sets off the self or the mind from the world. This is development of the luminous mind. And then by the realization that objects exist only through sense perception and through the sought. It's mind only, chitti matra. The store consciousness must be purged of its subject-object duality and then restored to its pure state. The pure state is the equivalent of the absolute suchness, tatha, to Buddhahood, to the undifferentiated. So this isn't quite Buddha nature, but it's this Yogacara jnana, corresponding to false imagination, right knowledge, and suchness, non-duality as it were, are the 3 modes of being, the mere fictions of false imagination. That would be the Theravada. The relative existence of things And under certain conditions or aspects, the perfect mode of being, non-dualism. Corresponding to this threefold vision of modes of being and awareness is the Trikaya doctrine of the Buddha, the apparitional body, the enjoyment body, and the Dharma body. A doctrine systematized by Yogacara thinkers. What does it mean he receives predictions or declarations? Vyakarana. And what does Rahula think of Asanga's Mahayana teaching? The idea of fresh religious experience, miraculous experiences, and so on. Well, is Rahula right in perhaps thinking that Asanga's ideas that aren't that far removed, at least from early Nikaya or Buddhism, if not Theravada? So in a book called Buddhist Phenomenology, Dan Lusthaus argues that according to Rahula, the thought of Asanga's Abhidharma Samayukya is closer to that of the Pali Nikayas than that of the Theravada Abhidharma. That's really interesting. We might argue that the three bodies, the Trikaya modes of being of the Buddha, are rooted in Hinayana teachings concerning the physical body, the mental body, and the body of law. Further, the Buddha himself in the Pali Canon articulated that Nibbana, in contrast to this world, that there were previous Buddhas. The later Stravaka writers of the Pali Canon declared the canon closed to fresh revelations, new religious experiences, not Mahayana. While Rahula would shudder at the thought of such unnecessary miraculous messages as heresy, that assumes the Trikaya bliss realm, where heavenly bodhisattvas and the Mahayana Yogacara thinkers like Asanga were, Basham would argue, beginning to think we can have these messages from his, well, Rahula would say it's just wrong. It's a fascinating class of mythical bodhisattvas. It doesn't exist. However, receiving these fresh revelations, these predictions and declarations, is what Mahayana is all about. Nagarjuna had claimed to get his insights from the sea serpents. Sangha claimed that the bodhisattva wisdom Maitreya had revealed to him several of his works, Abhidharma, Samayukya principally. The early perfection wisdom literature had maintained this approach, especially in the Lotus Sutra. It's the Buddha himself who turns up in Vulture's Peak. 500 arahats can't accept the Hinayana can't accept. It's the Buddha himself come to give them fresh revelations. They can't take the truth. They can't take the new teaching, and which presents a teaching as that which surpasses the partial Buddhist teaching as the final and perfected Buddhist teaching. So what does it mean? Anyone who aspires, from this we can see that anyone who aspires to become a Buddha is a bodhisattva, a Mahayanist. And what does Rahula think of Asanga's Mahayana teaching? Here again, Rahula is wanting to make a polemical argument, and he tries to conflate the 20th century Theravada teaching with the Mahayana ideas that it cannot be done. In the first historical Buddha discovered Nibbana taught the historical Buddha discovered Nibbana, taught it, and it's there now. In the other early Mahayana thinkers like Asanga came to teach and were already Tathagata Garbha, that we are already enlightened. We have at least later on, maybe not a Sangha, but the Tathagata Sutra, the Buddha nature school will argue, we have this Buddha nature, a Sangha will say this luminous mind, but you just have to discover it. One says we are not Buddha, and we need to become it. The other says, Theravada says, one says we're not enlightened, we're not awake, we need to listen to the Buddha by become an arhat, worthy one. The other says we are already the Buddha, we just need to become aware of it. What does it mean, a Mahayanist? I've already highlighted here, a Mahayanist. This section is him repeating his inclusivist claim. All Mahayana are really anonymous Theravada believers by the efficiency of the Theravada soteriological means. They'll be surprised, or maybe they won't because they don't exist. The Mahayana will get to Nibbana via the Arahat path and practices, even if they think they're doing something else epistemologically, as they understand themselves as Mahayana. What does Rahula mean? It's wrong to believe that there are no bodhisattvas in Theravada countries. Well, this is disingenuous. This is a really disingenuous claim. Rahula is using deliberately as a way of confusing the identity and the nature and the definition and the essence of bodhisattva and arahats. In Theravada, the identity of a bodhisattva is linked with historical Buddha or the kings of Sri Lanka, and that's it. While the nature of the historical Buddha and the kings of Lanka and Sri Lanka would say arhats is what really the rest of us can get to do. We get to pari nibbana at death, not remain, as Mahayana argues, bodhisattvas, to deliberately go into endless cycles of rebirth till all beings have been enlightened. At most, you could say that a person identifies as a bodhisattva. Well, yes, all Theravada seek enlightenment, and they want to be helpful. This is not essentially the same as the bodhisattva ideal. That's important. We're changing the essential nature and definition of the word. Is Rahula right that all bodhisattvas in Mahayana countries, all are bodhisattvas? Is it there? That are all are bodhisattvas? Yeah. Okay. So again, this makes the same assumptions as above. Basham would argue that Theravada are aiming at the Arhat path, and Mahayana are aiming at the bodhisattva ideal. There are levels of bodhisattva. I think most people who call themselves Mahayana would say, well, I am a bodhisattva, but they would recognize at different levels. They may not think they're heavenly bodhisattvas or even very advanced bodhisattvas. They're in the process of developing the perfections. Is Rahula right that not all conceivable Stravakas and bodhisattvas are concentrated? And what is he saying? It's not conceivable that all Stravakas and bodhisattvas are all concentrated in separate geographical areas. Again, this is a vertissimo, loud argumentation, repetition of his previous argument. If he says it enough times, you're going to believe him. But repeating the same argument doesn't make it any stronger. So this was section 11 of Rahula's Bodhisattva ideal in Buddhism.